Hello all and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for the US Teachers of Suburani experiences. We're joined today, I'm so grateful to be joined today by Ian, Brad and Susie, three people in schools in the US that have been using Suburani for up to 3 years. And they're going to share some of their experiences using the textbooks and the digital resources in their classroom. And there'll be loads of opportunities for you to ask them any questions you might have, either as they go or in the chat as well. So to just introduce them in order and that they'll speak in turn, we've got Susie Howe here, who's from Elgin Academy in Illinois. Brad Savage is from Tempe Preparatory Academy in Arizona, and then Ian Lockey is joining us from the Friends Select School in Philadelphia. And they have used different books of Suburani, and Brad will also talk a little bit about the primary Latin school course. And we're going to start out with hearing a little bit from Susie. If you've got any questions for Susie, then feel free to pop them in the chat or to sort of raise your hand and interrupt her, I think. And I'll let you take the lead, Susie.
Take it away, yeah. So I guess I will start by explaining how I first found Suburani. It was on Reddit, and someone on the Latin teacher subreddit was saying like, hey, there's this new textbook who people left Cambridge and were like, we're gonna make our own textbook with grit and reality. And so I went to the Suburani kind of demo website. At that point, I think still you can get the first 2 chapters of Suburani just for free and check them out. And I thought it was kind of fun to read. And so I showed it to all the classes I had that year, which would have been the 2018-2019 school year. And so I showed it to some middle schoolers and they were like, man, that's pretty cool. And then I showed it to some high schoolers who were even some kids who were doing the advanced placement class. And they were like, no, I wish I had had that book when I was in, Latin 1 or whatever. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to check them out. And then I think I didn't know they were going to be there, but I went to, in the summer of 2019, I went to the American Classical League conference in New York City, and the Hands Up Education team was there. And I was fangirling because I knew who they were. I knew what the story was. And so I went over, started talking to them, and Ian was with me. I think I dragged Ian over and was like, Ian, come check it out. And we started chatting, and I got to see the rest of book 1. And I think that was when I worked out with the Hands Up people that I was going to demo. I think Ian and I both were going to demo the book that coming school year. So, and that's when I started teaching with it full time. So that would have been the 2019-2020 school year, which ended on a really interesting note for everybody. So, I started out with it with 8th graders and Latin 1 kids. So that would have been 8th graders and 9th graders in the beginning of the year, and it was going along great. And then pandemic hit in about March, and we actually pivoted really well to using just the online textbook, or I think it was a combination, I think, of a PDF and the very early beginnings of the online active book. And we managed to make it through all of book 1, at the beginning of the pandemic. So we finished, it was 2019 and 2020. We those kids who are now sophomores in Latin 3 finished book 1. And then there was last year, which was terrible. And we started book 2, but so my school, when I started using Suburani, we had a schedule where I saw the kids every day for 45 minutes. I guess it was 3 days out of the week for 45 minutes, and then 1 day out of the week for 90 minutes. So I essentially got 5 periods worth of 45 minutes. And that was great, because we could do some more in-depth stuff during the 90-minute periods. And we could do, just read one of the short stories during one of the 45-minute periods. And then last year, my school moved to a trimester system where the kids took 2 or 3 classes at a time for 2 hours, 130 minutes for 12 weeks every day, and then never took that class again. So the kids who had finished book 1 of Suburani in the spring of 2020 didn't have Latin again, didn't like touch Suburani again until March of 2021. So it was like June of 2020 to March of 2021. They didn't see Latin or me at all. But surprisingly, like we definitely went back through. I had a new kid who joined us in Latin too. So we kind of redid, we like flew through, we did like a chapter a day of Suburani book 1 to review, because I was like, you guys haven't had Latin in what, 10, 11 months, something like that. So we flew through it, and then we started book 2. And went entirely paperless. So all of last year I was paperless, and I found that when I was planning and prepping my classes, the classes that were using Suburani were always the easiest to plan. I knew what I wanted to do. I had resources online. It took less time to prepare everything because there was a teacher community. So I don't know who's had access, who can see the online teacher resources. But there are resources provided by the Hands Up team, and then there are resources that are shared by other teachers. So between those two, kind of buckets of resources, there was always something for me to start with, or to work with, or just to use wholesale. And so Suburani kind of got me through last year, because I was really struggling teaching AP fully online, and like struggling with kids who were remote the whole year, being in person with some kids. But with Suburani, we could all look at the same stuff, we all had the same materials, and it was just so easy to go fully remote. Now this year we're back fully in person, no kids are remote, and we have yet another new schedule, where we have like a rotating block schedule of 75-minute periods, which I like a lot better. And Suburani is still working perfectly in that structure. So we oftentimes will start a chapter by reading the first kind of graphic novel style story. And I use like there's teaching notes for every chapter. And so I'll kind of read those sometimes beforehand, get an idea of the kinds of questions that I want to ask kids, like the leading questions of like, what do you see in this picture? And they always love finding like, the chamber pot that's being emptied in the first chapter, or the kid who's being pooped on by the pigeon, or they're always looking for Easter eggs in the backgrounds of the pictures. Although, and speaking of the primary Latin course, I don't know if Brad has noticed this, in chapter 1 of Suburani, there's a cat eating a fish. And I was like, it's whatever the cat's name is in the primary Latin course that's also like stealing and eating a fish. I think it's like Rufus or something. I forgot what the cat's name is, but I was like, I think that's an homage to the primary Latin course. So now I've got kids who are sophomores. They're in Latin 3. Ulysses, thank you. Yes, his name is Ulysses. Yeah. Yeah, so Ulysses the cat, I think, shows up. He's moved from Herculaneum to Rome, and he's still stealing fish. But so these kids who are in Latin 3, they've only ever used Suburani. And they're just now, like, we're finishing up book 2. And because we sort of like, again, with this like crazy schedule last year, we didn't get as far as I wanted to. I think we're in chapter 25 now. So we're gonna finish book 2 and then move them into maybe a little bit of like tiered Latin, maybe a little bit of like, Catullus, that kind of thing. But I don't have data to back this up, but their ability to retain Latin knowledge, like the nitty gritty of like, like what's a first declension noun, that type of thing. And their ability to translate is, in my opinion, better and stronger than the kids who I was using the Oxford Latin course previously. Those kids still feel overwhelmed by looking at a piece of Latin text. The kids who've had Suburani, they've just done so much reading that if I throw a piece of Latin text in front of them, they're just like, okay, let's break it down. We'll schematize it. I don't know. Let me look up. I don't know this word, but I'm gonna look it up. They've been trained by having these resources on Suburani to kind of puzzle things out, solve their own problems, ask each other, work together. And I really, really like those kids, the kids in Latin 3, the kids in Latin 2, and my kids in Latin 1 now. So I have 3 years worth of kids in Suburani. They don't have that paralyzing fear of like, there's a like unbroken Latin text in front of me, because they've been reading it and translating it since, chapter 1 of Suburani. And they're also motivated by the story. They, like, when I was trying to finish up book 1 in like early pandemic, I was like, okay, guys, I think we're going to stop at chapter 14. We'll pick up next year. It'll be an interesting cliffhanger. We'll pick it up next year. And they're like, no, please, we have to find out what happens to Sabina and Alexander. And like, please, before summer comes, like, we have to find out what happens. And so we just like, I was like, all right, you guys have to like bear with me then. We're going to go really fast through these last few stories. And they were like, okay, please. And so we read through chapters, like all the stories in chapters 15 and 16 in like the course of 2 days or something, because we had like 2 days left in the school year, but they wanted to know how the story ended. And I've never had kids in Latin who were like, please, we want to read Latin. And I was just like, all right, I'm sold. So, and it's still, those kids are like, ooh, what's happening next chapter? Like, I had one kid, one of these sophomores was flipping through book 2 because they finally have their, like, they bought the actual hard copy of book 2, and they got to chapter 28 or something. And there's like a horse-headed gorilla in one of the panels of the story. And they are just dying to find out why the heck there's a horse-headed gorilla. And they're like, and they flipped forward, and they were trying to read it, even though it was a couple chapters ahead of where we were. They didn't have the vocab yet, but they were like, it's something about someone's having a dream. I don't know. Like, and they were all like talking amongst themselves, trying to figure out what this story was 5 chapters ahead of where we were. So, and I love that. Like, I'm like, if you guys want to sit down and read the entire book by yourself, like, be my guest. And nobody has yet, but they love to engage with the stories. And it's almost like they pick up a book to read it for enjoyment, they get invested in the characters. And it also allows us, the characters in Suburani allow us to explore avenues of discussion that took a lot of effort to get to previously. So like with I have 2 8th grade girls this year. And we already were, I stole a worksheet from one of the teacher resources in chapter 1. It's like a worksheet with a couple videos, like a Romans in Focus video and a couple TED Ed videos on Vestal Virgins and women in Rome. And we had a great discussion this morning, with these 2 8th grade girls about women in the ancient world. And they were able to point to sources, and they were backing it up with things that Suburani had told them in like the English culture sections. And it's like week 3 of this school year. And then these 2 8th grade girls are just so motivated to find out more about it. And which I guess I also forgot to say. So my school is a pretty small school. I teach all the way from 7th grade through 12th grade. So middle school, all the way up through kids who are, taking, the AP exam or post AP potentially. And I use a different book in 7th grade because I often get new kids in 8th grade. And so that's sort of my Latin 1. And I have anywhere, like my smallest class this year is 2 kids. My biggest class is 12 kids. And that's my Latin 4-5 combined class. So it's a little smaller for me, but I know there are a lot of public school teachers around me. If you guys know Hinsdale, Central in Illinois, or Stevenson, I've kind of converted both those teachers to Suburani too. Like they I got a text from one of them the other day asking, for help on something. So I know it works in a public school environment, at least in Illinois, and I know it works in a small private school environment. And they just like, I haven't met a kid yet who hasn't been motivated and interested in something in Suburani. Either they love reading the graphic novel style stories, or they love, diving into the culture sections. They all love the vocab trainer, which to me is hilarious. Like I have one kid who, so we only got up to like Latin 1 last year, only got to chapter 10 because pandemic. But I had a couple kids in that class who worked through the vocab trainer all the way into like book 2. Like as soon as the book 2 chapters became available on vocab trainer, they were like, oh my God, there's new vocab trainer chapters. And they were doing chapter 17 and 18 and 19. And I was like, guys, like, we're not going to use this vocab for another year. Like you could slow your roll, but they love that. So they love the resources. They love being able to interact with it online. And it's just like, I have not yet found a weakness. I'm not going to say there isn't a weakness, but I haven't found it yet. And I've been teaching with Suburani for 3 years now. So, or this is the beginning of my 3rd year, if I'm doing my math right. Wait, 1920. Yeah. So I don't know if anyone has, I guess I've been talking for about 15 minutes, something like that. If anyone has any questions for me, I don't want to take up too much time. I'll let Brad and Ian talk, but I don't know. I sort of like, I feel like I'm like the Suburani like shill in Illinois. Like I feel like I don't know, they have the data, but there might be a cluster of schools that have converted to Suburani in Illinois. Just because every time I see other Latin teachers in Illinois, I'm just like, have you heard of Suburani? So yeah, I don't know. I can't really see everybody, so I don't know if anyone's like raising a hand or anything, but
I can't see any hands raised, but maybe there might be time at the end where we can take a few questions generally, and any of the 3 of you can respond. So if you've got a question for Susie, you can either put it in the chat or we can pick up later. Thank you so much. Well, I'm going to pass over to Brad, who also used to be in Illinois, but now isn't, I think. So let's see. And Brad is at Tempe Preparatory Academy in Arizona, and he's going to talk to you, I think, not just about Suburani, but also about Hands Up's primary Latin course for elementary level students. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. So this year, I'm currently at a charter school in Arizona, and I teach 7th and 8th graders. However, for 8 years, I was teaching at the Einstein Academy also in Elgin, Illinois. And at that school, everybody pre-K through 12 was taking Latin every day. And so that really required me to teach with a multitude of pedagogies. You know, as many of you probably were, I was trained on the grammar translation method, and but with 3- and 4-year-olds, you kind of have to see what's out there and really try to help them. And the Suburani course, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Suburani course book, but also they have, the resource I'm going to talk primarily about is going to be their primary Latin one, which is primarylatin.com. It's free. The students can access it at home, and often did last year. But what I like about both courses is that it really lends itself to a multitude of pedagogies, and it focuses not just on daily life and the everyday Roman, but it also brings in a healthy dose of the actual literature. The course I'm at now has a stated goal of teaching Latin and Greek so that students can read these wonderful works in the ancient tongue. But not all students are going to want to do this. Many are just interested in the archaeology, or just experiencing daily life in 2,000 years ago. So some textbooks focus on one or the other. Suburani and primarylatin.com do a good job of integrating both aspects of classical education. And so the presentation I have, I've put together 3 presentations I made, and some of which I put onto the Suburani Teachers Facebook page. I think I put another one on the Latin Teacher Idea Exchange. Regardless, they're all online. Feel free to access this this presentation as well. And then there's only the second one I'm going to show you is only partially there because I used images from other texts as well. But so I thought since I was teaching little kids, I thought I'll start at the beginning and then work my way up to sort of the middle level, and then show some of the things I was doing with Suburani and my advanced students. To show you just the kinds of things you can do and that will fit with a multitude of pedagogies. Let me advance the screen. Here we go. Okay. So here we've got something from primary. Why is it not moving? Let's move this way. Here we've got these whimsical pictures from primarylatin.com. My students just love them. And I am sharing my screen. Yes, I am. And there's these wonderful characters, and you know that iconic table that we see with the 3 chairs. And so really, you know, and this worked well, not just in person, because I had last year, some students were online, some students were there. And so the students were at home, they could access this. And then I could, you know, take these pictures and sort of do things with them as I'd want. So they have, of course, they're simple sentences, but then you can ask questions in Latin. And so I use these not just in my 3rd and 4th graders, but also with my 7th and 8th graders. And I continue to use them now at the school where I teach, just as sort of a review, get them reading something very quickly, and then also introducing them to, you know, syntactical changes across, you know, different kinds of sentences. And then, you know, so here, you know, just as I said, I've added the questions to the pictures they've given me. And as you can see, there's also an audio function on primarylatin.com, so you can press this and students can hear you know, the translation as well, so they're not just hearing your voice, they're hearing other people pronounce it. You know, so various people come in, they do different things, and there's just a multitude of questions you can ask. This can be, you know, scaled up to advanced students, or scaled down, like I said, to beginning students. Yeah, there's this singing servant or enslaved person here, and it also allows them to use their imagination. I think, you know, I asked them, you know, why was he happy? What was he doing? And so they could come up with all sorts of different things. So they're receiving input from me, and they may not be able to put it into Latin, their answers, but they're using their imagination. They're engaged in the story, and they're trying to sort of understand these characters. So then we also so that's, you know, one of the things, a lot of circling kinds of questions, which I primarily use with my lower students, but like I said, I use the middle schoolers and high schoolers as well. And then, so this one is something I use with my mid-range students, and this is an introduction to the indirect statement, and so I'm going to have them read something, give them a simple indirect statement, and then they can, you know, try to give me the answer, again using these pictures they're familiar with, but then giving them, you know, a sentence or two and having them try to translate it. I've even introduced, this may be an introduction to simple indirect statement, but I've used the passive voice, and so I think you can introduce, you know, some advanced structures per se, while still keeping it simple, but giving them the visual, I think, really helps. And then here I'm asking them to schematize things as Susie does, and just giving them sort of a structure. So then rather than explaining to them in sort of in a, you know, kind of theoretical way, this gives them a visual, as well as sort of a color-based way to see how this structure works. So again, you can use it with a multitude of pedagogies. This last one, this is from chapter 5 of the Suburani book. So this is actually moving from primary Latin into the Suburani book. What I have them do here is these, and enough cannot be said about these wonderful drawings. Obviously, it's a very different style in the Suburani book, but they're just beautiful pictures. Their artistry is just phenomenal. And even things like a bath, which must be incredibly difficult to imagine, has just come through with these beautiful colors and vivid characters, and the students just love looking at them. And so what I've done here is, on one day they've read the story, the graphic novel section of the text, and then I've asked them to sort of you know, come back to the story, remembering it. And so on one of the online resources, they give you the pictures without the text, so that you can do with it as you please. And so I just, you know, copied that file from their online resources and then added my own questions. And, you know, you can see a variety of people and doing a variety of things. The students are, of course, you know, shocked, especially my 5th and 6th graders, by the close to nudity you see sometimes, but I think it's a really wonderful portrayal of what this must have been like. And again, I ask a lot of questions in Latin to get them used to different kinds of structures. But like I said, it's what they hear there. I like these stories. They give you this not just with the words, but also without the words, so that you can do with it as you please. And this is more of a review exercise, and it would be to like, so I would introduce the story, and then the next day we do something like this. So I think they're anticipating the kinds of activities that teachers want to do with this material. So, you know, and then as Susie also mentioned, in addition to this, they also give you just a wealth of information, videos and other sort of secondary sources about the kinds of things you'll be reading about. And so here, after we do this, we'll then watch a video on the Domus Aurea, and then and we'll talk about the reign of Nero and life then. So that's that. And then again, we've got then some more with indirect statement, and I'm back to this the primarylatin.com text. Again, the schematization of it. And this is what I'm saying, how they also not just give you daily life, but they'll go into the different stories that advanced students will eventually be reading, so that they can have sort of an introduction to those stories. And when you get to them, they'll have an idea what they are. Because like I said, the school where I am now, it explicitly says the reason why we're doing Latin and Greek is so these students can read these stories in ancient Greek and Latin when it's possible for them to do so. You know, so, but it does it kind of at the same time. I really love that about what they're doing here. Where's the cat? There's the cat that Susie was also talking about. This cat appears a lot. And so, yeah, that's, you know, and like I said, you can access this whole thing. They're online on various resources, but also the whole presentation can be seen by using that bit.ly link. And I just, you know, I've used Cambridge. I've used just about every text there is. And this year I'm using Latin via Ovid for my students at the school where I teach now, which will probably change next year. Whether the students are being forced to take it, as some do, or whether they are encouraged to take it, you know, I think there's just a variety of materials that will excite even the student who just does not want to take Latin and kind of has to, or maybe being forced to by his parents, like I was, to take Latin. You know, so, and I just love the resources, and I love the fact that we're kind of all creating resources together to really make this a true community. So that's that. I just wanted to show some of the things I've done, and just to, again, sing the praises of this wonderful text.
Thank you, Brad. So can I just ask, do you, your students that use Suburani, are they used to seeing the primary Latin course and knowing the characters in that at the same time? Or are you sort of just using them as a little supplementary material?
So with the primary Latin ones, my pre-K through 4, I use that with them on almost a daily basis. But then so my middle schoolers would not have seen primary Latin because I didn't know about it when I was teaching them that. But I will use it also as a supplement to my Suburani. But at the time I was using Cambridge, it was a supplement to Cambridge, and just to sort of give them even more vivid pictures.
Great. Thank you so much. I imagine there might be some questions for you later, perhaps, but I will unspotlight you. Let's see, and pass over then to Ian. Let's see. Can I unshare your screen, Brad, or do you have to do that yourself? There you go. Ian is a teacher at the Friends Select School in Philadelphia, and he's going to talk a little bit about not just book 1 of Suburani, but he's also someone who's had quite a lot of time spent on book 2. So I will hand over to you, Ian.
All right, thank you. So yeah, I teach in Philadelphia. I teach, like Susie, I teach at a pretty small school. I teach at a Quaker school in Center City in Philadelphia. And there's a middle school Latin teacher, and I teach in the upper school, the high school. And our class sizes, again, are also pretty small. I think our largest class at the moment is 15 in 6th grade. I have 14 in 10th grade, but generally they're somewhere around like 6 to 10 students. I have had the least teaching experience with Suburani in the classroom because we piloted it in 7th grade and those students are now coming up into the upper school. I used it for the first time last year. There are a couple of things I want to add on to, particularly what Susie was saying about sort of getting to know Suburani. It was Susie who introduced me to Suburani also at the ACL in New York City. We were in a pretty problematic presentation by Cambridge, the Cambridge Classical Text, and left halfway through. And that was the moment where we went over and started talking to the team at Hands Up Education about Suburani. And like, I want to really stress that it was almost instant that I texted the middle school teacher at Friends Select School and said, you will be piloting this book next year. This is not up for discussion because it's so awesome. One of the things that I love so much about the Hands Up team is just how passionate they are about this project. It's been a really long time since there's been a new textbook series that's come out. I feel like the most recent one that has been used regularly in schools is perhaps Latin for the New Millennium, which I originally started teaching with, and is definitely a text that's more suited to college students. One of the things that I really appreciated early on was the fact that the team recognized that there was a need for a new textbook, for a series that that would sort of replace similar like pedagogical approaches, but really be written up to date without any of the sort of problematic storylines that had been in existence for sort of 50 years or so. So the like, in addition to sort of seeing the passion of the team when they were at the ACL and learning about what their vision was to create a textbook series that not only introduces students to the sort of richness and diversity of the ancient world, which is something I think other textbook series do quite poorly, also like presenting very honestly the fact that, you know, this is an empire and like an imperialist project, and it's not necessarily, or in many ways it's not good, and there were plenty of things that we need to sort of challenge within the ancient world too. And what really struck me was we got to look instantly at the I think it's chapter 5 or chapter 6 discussion of slavery in the ancient world, which typically, I mean, for many textbooks, for Cambridge and for Oxford and for Latin for New Millennium, is presented really problematically, and is often like the sections on it are often an apology for ancient slavery, because we're often trained to think so highly of all of the product of the ancient world, and the sort of the honesty with which they were presenting something that is so difficult to talk about often really was really impressive very early on. Dr. Kelly Dugan, who's at Trinity College in Connecticut, does some work on the problematic ways in which slavery is presented in textbooks. And having just come out of a talk that Kelly Dugan had given and looking at the presentation on slavery in the textbook, I like coming from a Quaker school where social justice is really like very high on our radar. I was very impressed to see a textbook really moving in the right direction when there'd been so much criticism online previously, particularly on Eidolon, of the ways in which ancient slavery had been presented. So just like, I want to really stress that the Hands Up team is an incredible team, and working with them since the meeting in New York City has been just like such a joy. I'll send an email through to the team and I hear back within like a few minutes. Like the response to emails is so quick, and then the sort of the excitement that like comes through in every meeting with them and every email about like just how great the textbook series launch has been, and like what it can possibly bring to the community is really great. I really appreciate the teacher community that Hands Up Education has generated around Suburani. I love the fact that this is a textbook series where it's not just Hands Up Education creating material for teachers to use, but they're celebrating the creativity and a knowledge of teachers themselves, and are willing to share all of those resources. Since it's such a new textbook, there are still some gaps on the website where I'm sure like soon more resources will start pouring in. But like I think probably within the next couple of years, it's just going to be such a robust place to land for Latin exercises for classes. And so I made some notes earlier, and I want to make sure I don't repeat what everyone else is saying. Another thing, actually, so talking about the sort of social justice aspect that I see in Suburani and the approach to being able to really have these in-depth discussions about the ancient world. I was lucky enough to sort of proofread through book 2, the sort of final version of book 2, like right at the end of the school year last year, as an English person in America, to check to make sure all the spellings were right, and just to sort of look out for like maybe grammatical differences, like our use of commas are different. And one of the things that really struck me was that, especially in book 2, students have the opportunity to really branch out. Not book 1 is very much focused on Rome and Northern Europe, but in book 2, students are really being introduced to the sort of diverse network of cultures that surrounded the empire or were on the fringes of the empire. So they go down to Carthage and they go to Asia Minor. They actually visit Aphrodisias, where I used to work. And then they're sort of connecting with people like beyond the borders of the empire, south of Egypt and further to the east. And it really gives a great opportunity, with resources already built in, for students to be introduced to not just this sort of whitewashed presentation of the city of Rome that most textbooks present, but the rich cultural network that existed not only within the empire, but also beyond the empire, and how they responded to each other. So I think that what I love is that the textbook allows all kinds of students to see themselves, and particularly if you're teaching Black students, oftentimes their only in is in a discussion of slavery and a sort of re-traumatization around like the sort of generational horrors. But book 2, particularly of Suburani, holds up these like really incredible, powerful African male and female figures that celebrate the rich cultures sort of outside of the Roman Empire, and allow people to see these like the sort of the like cultural success of various places that often don't get talked about, particularly in classics classes. And then as a sort of separate thing in terms of access to the book, we used it exclusively online last year. And one of the things that struck our entire department was just how affordable it is. The textbook, the hard copy textbook is cheaper than, say, Latin for the Millennium, but it's sort of around the same price as others. But I went to my department chair and said, I need like 60 copies of the digital access. And she asked me how much it would cost, and was like, oh, that is absolutely in our budget. It was, I mean, I think we ended up spending something like $155 to get copies of Suburani for everybody to use. And we didn't need to charge the students because we could cover it by the budget. But if students wanted access to the book, after you've bought one subscription for a school, it's only $5 per extra person. And so that just allows so much more access to materials that are often really expensive because they're so specialized. So I also really love that. A few other things to point out, just to piggyback off what other people have said a little bit. My students are really into the story, and I used it with 9th graders last year. They'd previously been using Oxford, and then at the end of 2020 had really not done a lot of Latin once we went remote, just because everything was in such a state of flux. It had been really hard to teach new material. So when they came into my classroom in September of 2020, all virtual and then hybrid, and then all virtual and then hybrid again, what I decided was, because there'd been such disruption and they'd only been through like a year and a half of middle school Latin, we would just start from the very beginning of book 1 of Suburani and move through pretty quickly. They they love the story in a way that they roll their eyes at most things, but we're following the story through, and they're really excited. I gave them projects to create towards the end of last year based on characters from the book, and I got all kinds of, like, I mean, they were picking out all kinds of characters, like Alexander's brothers. Someone put together a video being like, we are the like gurus of bricks in this area of Europe. Made like a trailer for a movie about their brick business. And so like even the minor characters, they're really excited to see. And the story is really good. The book one sort of ends on a cliffhanger, and having read through all of book 2 now, as I was proofing it, like it's pretty exciting. There's a lot going on. There's like danger in Rome. There's the big fire. There's Sabina leaving. There's all kinds of political intrigue. It's a really exciting story to follow through. I learned using the Cambridge text, and I found that like the first book of Cambridge, where it's set in Pompeii, I was like, oh man, I'm really into it. And then it moved to Britain, and I was like, all right, I don't really care anymore. But this is going to keep them going through. So it's a really great story, and just like Brad said, it's so beautifully illustrated that it's just such a joy to have up on the screen. And then I guess the sort of the couple of other things that I really appreciate about the textbook is that by starting the story in the Subura, it allows us to really have conversations from a non-elite perspective that other textbook series don't necessarily have, with the focus on these sort of wealthy families, with like Quintus in the Oxford course, or Caecilius in Pompeii. We really get to see the sort of like day-to-day life in a really productive way, and it's so productive because it makes such great use of archaeological remains as well as text. So I love that marriage together of a whole bunch of resources that teachers have instant access to, rather than having to hunt around to be like, all right, I need a street scene from Pompeii, or I need to read a book about X. All of that comes together in this textbook series in a really helpful way for teachers. And like Susie said, the teacher sort of handbook that goes along with the textbook series is really helpful to read through, especially as a sort of intro to cultural pieces. The vocab trainer, my students are also super into. Last year, my Latin 2 class decided to compete about who would spend longest on the vocab trainer after someone someone worked out that they checked their time, they'd been on there for like 10 hours. And I think it was just because they'd left it on. And then everybody else in the class is like, I will match and best that, but I will do it while also learning vocab. So their like grasp of vocab is phenomenal because they were just so competitive over who would have the best times. It wasn't even for extra credit. They just really wanted to do it. And I guess the final thing I would say is that I teach very much in the sort of grammar translation method. I love the amount of reading that students get to do. With Latin for the Millennium, when I taught with that, there just wasn't enough reading, and so students were very overwhelmed by Latin text, as Susie was saying. With Oxford, there was so much reading that we just couldn't get through it all. And these stories are accessible and like sort of interesting enough and short enough in chunks that they really are reading at a really high level. Even students who struggle with endings, because like particularly last year it was so hard to quiz on forms of the noun, they just have a natural ability to work their way through sentences. And it's because they've had the opportunity to read so much from these Suburani stories. So I really appreciate the reading method. And it can be easily supplemented if you want to be very, very grammatical at the same time. But also if you're a teacher who uses the CI method, there is plenty of scope for that kind of approach with this textbook. It really lends itself, as Brad was saying, to asking a lot of questions in Latin and expecting simple or more complex Latin responses. So yeah, to echo Susie, I I love this textbook series. I talk about it all the time with other teachers. I think I've convinced my teacher friend in New York City to switch, not this year, but the following year. And yeah, I'm yet to find anything really like that I would criticize about this textbook series. So I guess challenge to hands up to give me that one thing to do. But yeah, apart from that, I'll hand it back over for questions.
Thank you. So I'll leave the chat open here for anybody to ask some questions, but I've got some of my own, just kind of based on the kinds of questions that I get asked a lot, that we get asked a lot, that you might have some thoughts about, and see what you do in your classroom. So one of the things that I think people often ask is, what do you do with your students with the cultural readings in the book? How do you divide up the workload there? Do you get them to read it themselves? Do you read it with them? What do you do to get through that content, and how much of it do you do per chapter as well?
So I was just doing this today, so I'll jump in. I changed up a lot. So like for the section in chapter 1 that's called like Women at Work, I just found another teacher that had put together, and I feel terrible, I don't remember who it was. I could look it up quickly. It's on the website. But somebody had put together just a Google Doc that, you know, sort of took the topics from that culture reading and then like linked it to a Romans in Focus video and then 2 TED Ed videos with then questions. And so we sort of covered that cultural topic because like I read it, I knew what was in it. And then we watched those 3 videos, answered the questions that the other teacher had put together. And I just knew that we had covered what was in that cultural section without having to actually read it together in class. Other times, if it's long enough, I'll do like a jigsaw where I'll be like, you read this paragraph, you read that paragraph, you read that paragraph, and then you have to summarize it for the rest of the class. Sometimes I'll post a discussion on, we're using Schoology now. Last year it was Google Classroom. And I'll just use the questions that are either in the textbook itself, in that culture section or the history section, or in the teacher's guide, or I'll just like freestyle, put some questions of my own on there. And the kids have to read the section and then post an answer to the discussion. So we don't actually read, you know, I don't know if they've read word for word the culture section, but I do know that they've read enough to like put a cogent response to the discussion online. We've also just like, sometimes I was like, we're just going to read this. Like, this is great. This is like word for word. I just need you to sit quietly for a second, read this, and we're going to talk about it. So I've done lots of different things, and I'm sure I'm forgetting other ways that I've used them. One girl was out for all of last week. So she, like, her homework is like to catch up on like just reading all those, you know, all the navy blue headings on the active book. Because the other kid and I, who was in person last week, we did those all together. We sort of looked at them, we skimmed them, we talked about stuff. She's already had, the girl who was in school last week already had a year of Latin. So we were kind of reminiscing, talking about, you know, she and I had worked through the primary Latin course that Brad uses. So we were sort of like, oh, remember like this character from the primary Latin course. We also read novellas. So like we've related those culture sections to the novellas. Like I think we did, oh my God, it's Labyrinthus, I think. It's one of Andrew Olympi's novellas. And so like we were relating Ariadne to like, you know, the role of women in the ancient world, and she was Greek, not Roman. What does that mean? You know, like what are the expectations of her? So we sort of circle back and revisit a lot of those culture sections just thematically. And yeah, I don't know if anybody else has other ways that they use it.
Well, on primarylatin.com, they also do these things, fact file, which I really appreciate, because, you know, usually when you read, and they usually focus on a specific person, and it's not like an emperor or you know, some sort of, you know, high-ranking official. It's an everyday person. And so, you know, we get an idea, and not just, you know, that we have these sort of strong men ruling the area, but we have these individuals living out their lives. And I think it really allows the students to see themselves in these people in a more meaningful way. So in addition to the countless resources per chapter on the online section of Suburani, there's these wonderful, both mythological as well as sort of daily life sections, which I integrate as much as possible, and I can sort of tailor to my students. You know, I know they really like this particular part of the story, or one student has an interest in this. There's usually something I can find.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I do a lot of the same things that Susie does. One of the things that I really appreciate the resources that are added by Hands Up with each chapter in the active book. So oftentimes it's like a quick video that is already like there ready to go, or a really short article that maybe we can sort of tie in or read briefly after they've looked at the cultural section. And what I found, so my Latin, now going to be Latin 3 class, there are 14 of them in that class, and there's a big enough group in with each different topic that people are really interested, and the topics are so diverse that I think there are often things like perfume making, and like there's this like beautiful like fresco of these little erotes making perfume that's supplied with the thing, and it's just like little details like that where the kids are like, I don't think I care about perfume making, but this is really cool. And I love that there's this, like, that someone had this up on the wall in their house. And so like they've been really like, there's always enough energy around the different sections that it's worth, like, there are very few that we sort of skipped over, even with time constraints.
They love the poison chapter too, like where there's the Locusta is a character, and we learn all about ancient poisons. And they love it, which is slightly terrifying. But they like do their own Googling. Like they just get super into like, you know, belladonna and foxglove and digitalis, and, you know, and they high schoolers love poison apparently. But there's resources there for them to explore that interest. And that was one thing I was gonna kind of jump off what Ian was saying, is that, you know, they sort of like, Suburani does a great job of world building for ancient Rome. You know, like when we talk about, when you read a fantasy novel or something, people are all like, oh, like Brandon Sanderson, like his world building is so amazing. And that's what Suburani does too. Like they build the world around the characters. So it's not characters in a vacuum. It's not characters stuck in a ditch for 13 chapters to call out a certain Latin textbook. But they're actually like, they're out in the world interacting, they're learning things, there's character development, you see the world around them. And I think it really helps to build a visual of the ancient world for my students, because that's something that previously in my career, it was really hard for me. Like I was always trying to show them images of the ancient world. Like, this isn't what you think it looked like it looked like this, or this is exactly what you think it looked like. But they really struggle to visualize, and Suburani really helps them visualize the ancient world in a comprehensible way, you know, like an intelligible way. And then the other thing too that I wanted to build off of what Ian was saying is that Suburani is still growing and adapting and changing. Like you can send, like I don't know, I think it was with the discussion of enslaved people, we like ran from Kelly Dugan's presentation. She was like, there's not a single Latin textbook that discusses Roman slavery in like a sensitive way. And I was like, what about Suburani? And she was like, I've never heard of Suburani. And I was like, you need to go talk to them right now, because they can adapt stuff, right? Like, yes, it's a print book. Like you can get a hard copy, paperback or hardcover of the book, but they can always add stuff online. They can change stuff online. They can update it as you know, the research changes, as, you know, people realize that that's not a great way to talk about a certain topic. They can update it. And so it's not this fossilized artifact that can't grow and change. Suburani has that flexibility and that adaptability built into it, and I really appreciate that, because I try to instill that in my students, right? I'm sort of like, you're a human, you're like, what you learn now may not be true. Like, look at Pluto, right? Like that, when I was a kid, it was a planet, not a planet anymore, but there are still textbooks out there that say it's a planet, you know. But like, this is, you know, we can change, we can adapt, and as we learn new things. So
yeah, just to piggyback on that, first, I've never had a Latin textbook where students were so, like, out of nowhere, there'll be like a little detail and they're like, I have this crazy question, do you mind if I just Google this? Like, it's a very Googleable textbook, like in terms of like thirst for knowledge that students have. And also one of the things that I really appreciated in the first meeting, having come out of the presentation by Cambridge, that had been very problematic, particularly around slavery and like, when is it appropriate to present this to students? And, oh, well, I don't know, like, it's just gonna have to be on you. One of the things that I really appreciated was like, like Hands Up Education is not precious in any way about this textbook series. Like, they want the input from other people. And with the Cambridge textbook being 50 years old at that point, and it's very difficult to update the story to really mask the problems that existed in the original narrative. Something that really stuck with me that Will said was that, you know, like, we're writing this textbook now, and in 50 years time, we'll throw it away and start again because we're going to need a new textbook series. Just this like recognition that like things change and things advance, and like what we think is okay right now, what seemed okay like in the 80s when Cambridge was putting their textbook series together, just aren't okay right now or anymore. And this recognition that this has to like evolve, and when it can't evolve anymore, then we just start again. And I really appreciated that, like, that sort of student focused, society focused, justice focused approach to creating resources for teachers.
Thank you. Well, I was going to ask you one question that is like super huge, but you've only got 3 minutes, but maybe you can like throw your best ideas at me. And it was going to be, how do you vary your approach to what you do with a Latin text in a chapter? So you can read things together. At the other end, you could get students to translate it by themselves. What strategies have you got for varying that and having different objectives with the different stories? In 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'll try to take 30 seconds so I leave time for them. So generally the graphic novel style story in the chapter, and there's usually one per chapter, we read that together just because like the visuals we like to explore together. The stories that are more just like straight text or maybe even a dialogue, I seal the like comprehension questions or the decum questiones latine in the resources that are provided by Hands Up, and I turn those into like a Google form, and then I send that to the kids and I make them work with the text on their own. Like, I'm sort of like, you have to answer these comprehension questions and I'm not gonna, you know, like interact with you, like you interact with the text, just the two of you. Or sometimes they do it in groups. But those are kind of my two favorite ways, like the graphic novel together, and then the other stories, letting them, you know, answer in Latin with the decum questiones latine, or the comprehension questions as a Google form.
And then online, they give you 3 or 4 different versions of the questions. So sometimes you can, if the students are very advanced, you can give them the questions in Latin. If they're struggling, you give them the questions in English. Or they may have, you know, give this verb in Latin, or they may have you circle, they'll give you a multiple choice. So you can maybe even give, you know, different forms of the worksheet to different students, or if you have a class that's struggling, you know. So that's what I really like. There are 4 or 5, sometimes 4 or 5 different versions of the same worksheet, depending upon, you know, the strengths of the students or the class in general.
Yeah, and I would just add the active workbook, because you can click on every word, really makes this a productive resource for sight reading. And so we'll often sight read stories together, even without the sort of graphics to help understand what's happening. And given the sort of, you know, we're still in a pandemic, and like, who knows if we will at some point have to go, like, hopefully not, but have to go virtual, have to go hybrid again for a portion of the year. The resources that are available with the active workbook, and I, similar to Susie, I would download the comprehension and turn it into an editable PDF. This was a textbook series that was so easy to use virtually. Like, there was never a moment where I was like, oh man, I need to scan a page, or I need to do that. Like, everything was there. The students could access everything, like with sharing screen. Like, it was all really useful during the pandemic. And again, as Susie said earlier, like it basically planned itself in a world where it was so difficult to work out, like, how am I going to do this translation with my Latin 5 class that's complex and needs a commentary and vocab and like all of this stuff, and how do I break these sentences down? Like, it was really easy to do this. And so like, and I imagine is going to be like even simpler once everyone's back in the classroom and no one's at home. So starting tomorrow, like I like it really is a super accessible textbook for everybody.
Thank you so much, Ian and Susie and Brad, for giving your time and giving us a lot to think about. It's really, really great to hear, you know, how things work in practice in your classrooms and what have been the strengths of the course for you so far. So thank you so much for giving us your time and your expertise. And thank you for everyone for attending. We'll put this online so you can watch it again afterwards, or you can share it with anybody. It's not just for the people who were physically signed up, but it will just be freely available for anybody to access on our website. We've got some more events coming up as well over the next few weeks. There'll be some dates going out soon for further topics. And I'm hoping you all have a very good start to your school year in the next few weeks. All right, I'll say goodbye here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.